The exchange the sun hung low over the bustling space station, casting long shadows across the marketplace. Ships of all sizes were docked, their cargo being unloaded by busy workers in brightly colored suits. The air was filled with the noise of deals being struck, voices shouting across the open space, and the clinking of alien currency. It was a place where power was traded just as easily as goods. And today, one such trade was about to happen. In the center of the market, a tall, broad-shouldered human captain stood. His uniform was worn and battle-scarred, but his posture remained proud. His eyes scanned the crowd, cold and calculating as he waited. Beside him, an alien woman stood chained, her expression one of quiet despair. Her blue skin shimmered under the lights, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. This wasn't the first time she had been sold. Her people had been traded many times before, but she had never felt more powerless than in this moment. She had been given, as a payment, a prize for a deal no one had explained to her. The captain, a stranger in this vast, unknown galaxy, was now her new owner, or so it seemed. The alien woman's name was Lyra, and her life had always been dictated by others. She had been raised to serve, to fight, and to survive. But never had she been reduced to such a low state. To be handed over like this, to be nothing more than a commodity in someone else's hands, felt like the end of everything she had known. As the captain spoke with a group of alien traders, Lyra tried to listen, but their language was foreign to her. She had no idea what was being said, but from the way the traders looked at her, she knew her fate was sealed. The trade was almost complete. The captain turned to her then, his gaze softening for the briefest moment, as if he were trying to read her. She looked back at him, eyes narrowing in suspicion. What did he want from her? Why had she been chosen for this deal? She had heard rumors of humans before, but none of them were good. They were known for their ruthlessness, their willingness to fight for what they wanted, and their ability to destroy everything in their path. Her hands clenched into fists, the cold metal of her shackles biting into her skin. She wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that she had been traded away like an object, or the unsettling feeling that something was wrong, something she couldn't yet understand. The captain motioned to a group of soldiers who had been standing nearby. They were watching Lyra carefully, their expressions unreadable. The soldiers moved to unlock her chains, and she felt a chill run down her spine. The moment her chains fell away, she would no longer be in the hands of the traders. But what would come next? She couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to take a turn she was not prepared for. Lyra took a step back as the captain moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. The crowd seemed to fall silent, sensing the shift in the air. There was something dangerous about the captain, something she couldn't quite place, but the fear in her chest was growing. She had been trained to fight, to survive in harsh conditions. But this was different. This was not just a battle for her life. It felt like a battle for her soul. He spoke to her then, his voice low and commanding. "You'll be safe with me," he said, his words not matching the hard edge in his tone. For now. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, and she struggled to control the rising panic. She wanted to fight, to escape, but she knew she had no strength left, no energy to resist. She had been worn down by years of servitude, and now she was just a pawn in a much larger game. The captain turned away from her, as if deciding the trade was final. He motioned for her to follow him, and without a choice, she did. Her legs felt weak beneath her, but she walked, step by step, through the marketplace, her eyes scanning the darkened corners. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, there, whispers echoing in her ears. They knew who she was, an alien woman of value, traded away as payment for a debt. As she moved farther from the traders, Lyra dared to glance at the captain. His face was unreadable, the same cold mask he had worn when he first arrived. He wasn't interested in her, not in any way she could understand. But there was something about him that made her pause. What was he hiding? What was his true purpose in all of this? The marketplace seemed to disappear as they reached the ship, a dark, imposing vessel parked in the shadows. The captain motioned for her to enter first. She hesitated, but the soldiers behind her made it clear she had no choice. Lyra stepped. Aboard the ship, her heart racing with each step. What awaited her on this ship? What future did she face now? As the hatch closed behind her, the captain stood by, watching her. And for the first time, Lyra felt something other than fear. She felt curiosity. What was his game? And what was she to him? Unveiling secrets, Lyra stood motionless in the dimly lit corridor of the ship, her eyes scanning the walls, each one cold and metallic. The captain had said nothing as they moved through the ship, his footsteps steady and unwavering. She had been brought here, away from the marketplace, away from everything she knew. There was no escape now, and that truth weighed heavily on her chest. As they walked deeper into the ship, Lyra tried to ignore the strange chill in the air. She could feel the hum of the ship's engines beneath her feet, but it wasn't the noise that unsettled her. It was the silence between her and the captain. He hadn't spoken since the moment they boarded, and that made her uneasy. Was he trying to intimidate her? Or was there something else at play? They stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. The captain glanced at her, his face unreadable, before he reached for the control panel and opened the door. It slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a small, sparse room. The walls were bare, and a single cot sat in the center, along with a desk and a chair. There were no windows, just the cold, metallic interior of the ship. "This is where you'll stay," the captain said, his voice calm, yet there was an edge to it that made Lyra's skin crawl. She didn't move, unsure if she should enter or refuse. But the way his gaze lingered on her made it clear there was no choice. "You'll be safe here for now," he added, though the uncertainty in his words made her question his true intentions. Lyra hesitated. The ship's walls felt like they were closing in on her, the air heavier with each passing second. She couldn't stand the silence any longer. Her curiosity about the captain had grown with every step, and now it burned in her chest. A question that refused to leave her thoughts. Who was he really? Why? Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the quiet. "Why me? Why did they give me to you?" The captain remained silent for a long moment. He turned his back to her, his hands clasped behind him, his gaze fixed on the view through the small port in the ship's wall. The stars were distant pinpricks of light, cold and indifferent, like everything else in this galaxy. "Not everything is as it seems," he replied, his voice low, almost as if speaking to himself. "You're more than just a payment. You're part of a much bigger plan." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. What did he mean? She wasn't just part of some exchange. She had always been used, but this felt different. This felt like something far larger than herself. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The captain sighed and finally turned to face her. His expression softened. Just a fraction, but there was something there, something human, something she hadn't expected. It made him seem less like the cold soldier she had imagined, but more like someone trapped in a situation he didn't fully control. "You'll learn soon enough," he said. "But for now, just stay here. I'll check in later." With that, he left the room, the door sliding shut behind him with a soft hiss. The silence returned, and Lyra was left alone to digest his words. A bigger plan? What could he possibly mean by that? Her mind raced as she walked over to the small cot, sitting down on the edge. She had no idea what was happening, but one thing was certain. She was no longer just a pawn. She was something else now, something far more significant. But what? She glanced around the room, looking for anything that could give her a clue. The walls were bare, but the desk had a few pieces of equipment on it, nothing unusual. But then, her eyes landed on a small, worn book, placed neatly on the desk. Curiosity pulled her toward it. She opened the book carefully, its pages yellowed with age. The text was in a language she didn't understand, but the symbols seemed familiar. She had seen them before, in old records from her people, written long ago. Her heart raced as she flipped through the pages. It spoke of ancient prophecies, of a great power that would rise from the ashes of war, and of a human who would lead it. Could this be the captain's plan? Was this the secret he was keeping from her? The door slid open again, and Lyra quickly closed the book, stuffing it under her cot. The captain stepped inside, his eyes immediately catching the faint movement. "What did you find?" he asked. His voice sharp. Lyra froze. The captain's gaze seemed to pierce right through her, and for a moment she was certain he knew exactly what she had seen. But then, to her surprise, he didn't pursue the matter. Instead, he simply nodded. "I'll leave you to rest," he said. "We move soon. Get ready." As the door shut again, Lyra sat back, her mind whirling with new questions. The book, the cryptic message, the captain's secretive behavior, it all pointed to something far bigger than she could comprehend. She was no longer just a victim in this transaction. She had a role to play, whether she understood it or not. And somewhere, deep inside, she felt the stirrings of something ancient awakening within her, something that could change everything. The unexpected bond days passed aboard the ship, and Lyra's life became a routine of silence, the hum of the engines, and the cold presence of the captain. The crew, a mix of humans and other species, kept to themselves. No one spoke to her directly, and she had no idea why. The captain had kept his distance as well, only checking in occasionally, never explaining the next steps or giving her any more insight into why she was here. It was as though she was a prisoner in her own mind, trapped in a world she couldn't understand. But despite the isolation, something had begun to change. The moments she spent alone in the small room were growing heavier, filled with thoughts she couldn't escape. She had tried to read more of the book she had found, but the words were still foreign to her, the symbols dancing just beyond her grasp. And then one evening, something shifted. It started with the soft sound of footsteps outside her door. At first, she ignored it, thinking it was just another crew member passing by. But then the door slid open, and there stood the captain, his face unreadable as always. He stepped inside without waiting for her response. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice a little more than a murmur. "That's not like you." Lyra met his gaze, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected him to approach her this way. But his words stirred something inside her. Was he trying to reach her? Or was this just another calculated move? "I have nothing to say," Lyra replied, her voice tinged with bitterness. The silence between them had been suffocating, and every glance exchanged had only added to the tension. She hadn't asked to be a part of this, and she certainly didn't want to be tied to him. The captain's eyes softened for just a moment, almost imperceptible, before his mask of indifference returned. He stepped further into the room, his boots clicking softly on the metal floor. "I know you think this is all a game," he said, a hint of something darker beneath his words. "You're a prize, a payment, a pawn in a much larger game. But I need you to understand one thing: your presence here matters. Not just to me, but to everyone." Lyra felt a surge of confusion. Was he telling the truth? Or was this some manipulation to keep her in line? His words felt heavy, too heavy, like they were meant to make her question everything she had believed. "Why me?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Why am I the one they gave to you? What do you want from me? The captain stood in front of her, his eyes locked on hers. There was no mockery in his gaze, no disdain, just an odd, steady calm. He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. Didn't choose you, he said, his voice low. But you're here now, and you're more important than you realize. The galaxy's future might depend on you, on us. Lyra shook her head, unable to process what he was saying. She had heard whispers of prophecies before, but they had always seemed like tailies meant to control the weak. Could it be that this was real? That she was somehow central to whatever war was brewing? Before she could voice another question, the captain continued, his voice softer now. You're not like the others, he said, almost as if talking to himself. There's something inside you, something I didn't expect. Lyra's heart skipped. Something inside me? What do you mean? Her voice was barely a whisper now, uncertainty creeping in. Was he speaking of her strength, her history? Or was there something more, something even she didn't understand? The captain remained silent for a moment, his gaze distant. He didn't seem to know how to explain it either. But then, in a rare moment of vulnerability, he spoke again. I've seen many battles, Lyra. I've faced enemies, stood beside friends, and fought wars, but nothing compares to this. He took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. You're more than what they told me. I never expected you to be like this. Lyra's mind was racing. There it was again, the feeling that there was something bigger at play. Something beyond what she could grasp in a single moment. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice growing steadier despite her confusion. The captain's gaze met hers once more, his expression shifting slightly, almost, like a shadow passing over his face. You will, he replied simply. In time, you will understand. And then, without another word, he turned and left the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts. For a long while, Lyra sat in silence, her mind spinning with the captain's words. She had always been told what to do, what to think, and how. To survive. But this was different. The captain's words hinted at something more. Something she had never considered. She wasn't just a victim of a galactic transaction anymore. There was more to her than she could see. And in that quiet moment, she realized that the captain might not be the enemy she had assumed. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was the key to unlocking her true potential. As the ship hummed softly around her, Lyra's mind settled on one thought. This journey had only just begun. Asterisk the truth revealed. Days blurred into each other as the ship hurtled through space, its engines humming steadily as they traveled farther from the marketplace. Lyra's time aboard the ship had become a strange mix of isolation and reluctant curiosity. She couldn't stop thinking about the captain and his cryptic words. You're more than you realize. What did he mean by that? And why did it feel like she was part of something far bigger than herself? The captain had kept his distance, but he hadn't forgotten about her. Every now and then he would appear at her door, his eyes scanning her like a puzzle he hadn't quite solved. His gaze had softened since that first meeting, but Lyra couldn't tell if it was because he had wounded her, or if it was something more calculated, another part of the game he was playing. Then, one day, everything changed. The door slid, open without warning, and this time the captain didn't wait for her to speak. He stepped inside, his face more serious than she had ever seen. There was no hint of the casual confidence he had always exuded. This time something felt urgent. We need to talk, he said, his voice clipped. Lyra stood up from her cot, the book she had been studying resting forgotten on the desk. Her pulse quickened. She had felt it, the shift in the air. Something was happening, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. What is it? She asked, her voice steady, despite the storm of questions swirling in her mind. The captain didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the desk and picked up the book she had been reading. His fingers brushed the cover, and for the briefest moment, she saw something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition. "You found this," he said, his tone softer, almost reluctant. "Did you understand what it means?" Lyra swallowed. She hadn't understood much, but the symbols, the drawings, the strange words, it all pointed to something ancient. Something forgotten. "No," she admitted, her voice quiet. "But it looks familiar. It's from my people." The captain nodded slowly, placing the book back on the desk. "It's not just from your people. It's from a time long before the current galactic order was formed. What you're reading is part of a prophecy that foretells the rise of a new power, one that will reshape the galaxy." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. "A prophecy? But I'm just one of the last of my kind. What does that have to do with me?" The captain's gaze darkened, and he stepped closer. "It has everything to do with you." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. What was he saying? She had heard tales of prophecies, of ancient leaders who would rise from the ashes of old wars, but they always seemed like stories to keep people in line, to give them hope. Never had she imagined that one of those stories could be about her. "You're the key to it all," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You're the one who will either bring about the destruction of this galaxy or its salvation." Lyra's mind reeled. She took a step back, her hand gripping the edge of the desk for support. "What are you talking about?" "I don't have any power. I'm nothing. I've always been a slave to someone else's will." The captain's expression softened for a moment, and he reached out, but then pulled back, unsure of how to comfort her. "That's exactly what they want you to believe," he said. "Your people, your lineage, it's all been hidden. They've made sure you don't know the truth. But you're part of something far older, far more powerful than you could imagine." Lyra shook her head, her thoughts swirling. This didn't make sense. She had been nothing but a pawn in a game for as long as she could remember. And now, suddenly, she was supposed to be the key to some galaxy-altering prophecy? "You're not alone in this," the captain continued. "There are others who will come for you, people who want to control you, use you. But there are also those who will fight for you, protect you. You don't have to be a weapon or a tool. You can be something more." Her heart pounded. A weapon? She had always been trained to fight, to survive. But never had she thought of herself as more than that. And now, standing in this cold, dimly lit room, she wondered if the captain was right. Could she be more than the sum of what others had made her? "You don't have to decide everything now," the captain said, sensing her internal struggle. "But you will have to decide soon. There are factions hunting you, Lyra. You won't be safe for long." Suddenly, the door to the room opened, and a voice crackled over the ship's intercom. "Captain, we've detected an incoming fleet. They're not broadcasting any signals. Unknown ships. They're too close." The captain's face darkened instantly. He turned to the door, his hand hovering over the control panel. "Get to your quarters, Lyra. Now." Before she could respond, the door slammed shut behind him, and she was left standing in the room, her heart racing. An incoming fleet? Her mind was a whirlwind. Who were they? Were they coming for her? The truth, whatever it was, had just begun to unfold, and now it was closer than ever. Whatever power lay within her, whatever fate awaited, Lyra knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had just changed, and her role in it had only just begun. Asterisk betrayal and the unexpected choice. The ship shuddered as the warning lights blinked too. Life casting an eerie red glow across the walls. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as the sounds of the crew scrambling to their stations echoed through the hallways. The captain had told her to stay in her quarters, But she could feel something was wrong. The atmosphere had shifted, and it wasn't just the fear of an unknown fleet approaching. It was something deeper, something personal. She glanced at the door, debating whether to stay or to defy the captain's orders. Every instinct in her screamed to leave, to find out what was really happening. She wasn't a prisoner anymore, at least. She didn't feel like one. The captain had let her inside his world, and now she wasn't sure if she was prepared for the consequences of that trust. Her hand hovered over the control panel beside the door, and with one decisive movement, she pressed the button. The door slid open, and she stepped into the corridor. The chaos outside her quarters was worse than she imagined. Crew members rushed past her, shouting orders, while others scrambled to secure the ship's defenses. But there was one voice that stood out above the rest, the captain's, cutting through the noise like a blade. Lyra followed the sound, her steps quickening as she moved toward the bridge. She knew the captain was there, and if he was there, then she needed to be there too. When she reached the door, she didn't wait for permission. She pushed it open, stepping into the room. The captain stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the view of space outside, his expression grim. "Captain," Lyra called, her voice sharp. He turned slowly, his gaze locking with hers, but there was no warmth in his eyes. A cold, calculating look from their first encounter was back, harder than ever. "I told you to stay in your quarters," he said, his tone clipped. "This is not your fight." "But it is my fight," Lyra replied, taking a step closer. "I don't know what's going on, but I want to understand. I deserve to know." For a moment, the captain said nothing. His fingers hovered over the controls, adjusting the ship's course. But his eyes never left her face. "They're here," he said quietly, his voice thick with frustration. "I thought we had more time." "Who are they?" Lyra asked. "What do they want with me?" The captain's jaw tightened, and he let out a deep sigh. "It doesn't matter who they are," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "What matters is that they've found us, and they're not here to negotiate." Just then, a loud crash echoed from the hull of the ship, followed by a shudder that rattled the walls. Lyra felt the floor beneath her feet tremble, and the alarms blared louder. The ship was under attack. "I need you to stay back," the captain ordered, his voice urgent. "This is getting worse than I thought. I don't want you involved in this." But Lyra didn't back down. She could feel the weight of his words, but something inside her burned, a determination she hadn't felt before. It was as if the events of the last few days had awakened something in her, something that made her want to stand her ground, even if it meant facing the unknown. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice firm. "You've already pulled me into this, whether you want to or not. I'm a part of this now, whether you like it or not." The captain's eyes darkened, a flicker of something passing through them, perhaps frustration, perhaps guilt. But he didn't argue. Instead, he turned back to the control panel, his fingers flying over the buttons. "Fine," he said, his voice resigned. "But don't say I didn't warn you." Before Lyra could respond, the sound of heavy boots echoed from the corridor outside the bridge. The captain's face hardened as he motioned for her to stand behind him. The door burst open, and two heavily armored soldiers entered. One of them, a hulking figure with dark green skin, stepped forward, his weapon aimed at the captain. "You've disobeyed orders," the soldier said, his voice low and menacing. "We're taking you into custody, Captain." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. What was going on? Who were these soldiers? And why did they seem so intent on taking the captain? She had seen this before: betrayal, manipulation, but now it was happening right in front of her. "I'm not going anywhere," the captain said, his voice unwavering. "You'll have to kill me first." The soldier chuckled darkly. "You think you can stop us?" Before the captain could respond, the ship rocked again, this time with more force. The soldiers staggered, their grips on their weapons faltering. What the hell is happening? The soldier in the back muttered. Lyra's eyes darted to the captain. What's going on? The captain's face had gone pale, his eyes wide with realization. We've been betrayed. They're here to take me, and they're using you to do it. Lyra's mind raced. The truth was coming faster than she could process, and every step seemed to bring her closer to a choice she wasn't ready to make. The captain had trusted her enough to let her in, but now she had to decide whether to trust him back. The soldiers closed in, weapons aimed at the captain. In that moment, everything froze. She had a choice. She could step aside, let the captain face whatever betrayal had come his way, or she could fight for the only person who had ever seen her as more than just a pawn in someone else's. Game. She didn't have to think long. Her heart knew what to do. Without a second thought, Lyra lunged forward, her hand reaching for a weapon. The captain's eyes widened in surprise, but he didn't stop her. Get ready, he whispered. Fight for their lives had just begun. Asterisk. The final decision, the blaring alarms of the ship echoed through the darkened hallways, a sharp reminder of the chaos unfolding around them. The soldiers' heavy footsteps reverberated through the corridor, their weapons raised, but Lyra didn't hesitate. The captain had trusted her with the truth, and now it was her turn to prove that she could stand beside him. She grabbed the nearest blaster, her fingers trembling only slightly as she took aim at the soldiers closing in. The air felt electric, charged with danger, and yet her mind was clearer than it had been since she'd boarded this ship. She had to fight. She had no choice. The first soldier lunged toward the captain, his massive form blocking the doorway. But Lyra was quicker. She aimed and fired, the blast of energy hitting the soldier square in the chest, knocking him back against the wall. He slumped to the floor, unconscious but alive. The second soldier, smaller and quicker, reacted instantly. He raised his weapon, aiming at Lyra. The blast was fast, but she was faster. She dove to the side, rolling behind a row of supply crates, and fired another shot, this time catching the soldier off guard. The blast sent him tumbling to the ground, his weapon slipping from his hands. He groaned, dazed but alive. Lyra's heart raced, but her focus was sharper than ever. The sound of heavy footsteps approaching from behind made her spin on her heels. The captain stood at the helm, his back to the chaos, watching her with a gaze that held both surprise and something else. Pride, maybe, or gratitude. You can. Fight, he said, his voice quiet but full of admiration. We don't have much time, Lyra replied, her eyes scanning the bridge for any other threats. We need to move now. The captain nodded, his face hardening with determination. He had always been the leader, the one in control, but now, in this moment, it was clear that they were partners in this war. She wasn't just a pawn. She was part of the plan, part of the rebellion that was beginning to form. And together, they could make a difference. We're not done yet, the captain said, his voice a low growl as he motioned toward the control panel. Get to the gun deck. We're about to make a stand. Lyra didn't hesitate. She moved swiftly, her mind racing with the decision she had to make. The battle was far from over, and their enemies were closing in on all sides. But in the middle of the chaos, something clicked inside her, a realization that there was no turning back. She could never go back to the life she had before. Whatever path lay ahead, she would walk it with the captain, even if it meant facing the full weight of the galaxy's wrath dot. As they made their way toward the gun deck, Lyra could feel the heat of the battle growing closer. The ship groaned under the pressure of incoming fire, and the hull shook violently. It felt like the very ship was alive, struggling to stay intact against the assault. We're not just fighting for survival anymore, the captain said as they reached the weapons bay. We're fighting for the future of the galaxy. And whether you realize it or not, Lyra, you're the key to everything. This ship, this fight, it's all been leading to this moment." Lyra stopped in her tracks, her heart thundering in her chest. The key to everything? The words echoed in her mind like a siren's call. Was it possible? Could she really be the one to change the course of the war? To reshape everything they had known? The captain turned to her, his face grim, but his eyes were fierce. "You don't have to choose this path, Lyra. But if you do, there's no going back. The galaxy is already watching, waiting for the moment when the power shifts, and you will decide what happens next." The weight of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. She had spent so long being told what to do, being used as a tool, in someone else's game. But now here, in this moment, she realized something: she didn't need to be anyone's tool. She could be the one to write the future. "I'm with you," Lyra said, her voice firm. "Let's finish this." They moved together toward the control center, where the crew was already in position, preparing to launch their final assault. The captain's hand rested on the control lever, ready to unleash the ship's most powerful weapon. "I've always been a soldier, Lyra," the captain said as he looked at her, his expression softening. "But I've never fought for something like this. For something worth dying for." Lyra nodded, her heart racing as she stood at his side. "Then let's make sure we don't die today." The sound of blaster fire filled the air as they launched. The weapon, their ship's railguns cutting through the enemy's shields like a hot knife through butter. It was a blinding flash of light and force, everything they had worked for, everything they had fought for, culminating in this one moment. For the first time since she had been handed over as a payment, Lyra felt a surge of something deep within her: power, yes, but also purpose. The galaxy was on the edge of a precipice, and she had just taken the first step toward deciding which way it would fall. The battle wasn't over, and the war was far from won. But as the ship's weapons tore through the enemy fleet, Lyra knew one thing with certainty: this was her fight now. And whatever came next, she would face it head-on, with the captain by her side. And no matter the cost, she would fight for the future. Asterisk.